Blood stained the marble floors of the council chamber that night, and the girl they once called Traitor stood over the bodies of those who had condemned her. She had been cast out, stripped of her name, marked for death by the very wolves she had sworn to serve. They thought breaking her would be easy. They thought a lone wolf without a pack was already dead. But what they didn't know was that some wolves are not broken by exile. Some wolves are forged by it. And when she returned, it wasn't for forgiveness. It was for the crown they never thought she'd dare to touch. Before we continue, kindly subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The winter wind cut through the valley like a blade, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant smoke. Zephira knelt in the center of the stone circle, her wrists bound with iron chains that burned against her skin. Around her, the 12 members of the High Council stood in their ceremonial robes, their faces hidden beneath wolf skull masks that gleamed white in the torchlight. The night was so cold that her breath came out in visible clouds, but the shivering that ran through her body had nothing to do with the temperature. She had known this moment was coming for 3 days now, ever since the accusations had been made. 3 days after her own blood kin, her cousin Tavros, had stood before the council and declared her a traitor to the pack. 3 days since everything she had ever known had begun to crumble around her like ash. The eldest of the council, a man named Corvith whose voice sounded like gravel grinding beneath a boot, stepped forward. His mask bore markings in red ochre, symbols of his authority that had been passed down through 7 generations of his bloodline. When he spoke, the entire valley seemed to fall silent, as if even the wind itself was listening. Zephira, daughter of Morni, sister to the fallen Alpha Driven, you stand accused of the highest crime known to our kind, Corvith announced, his words echoing off the surrounding cliffs. You are charged with conspiring to betray the sacred location of our ancestral den to the southern packs, those who have been our enemies since the time of the first wolves. You are charged with plotting to sell our secrets for gold and safe passage into their territories. How do you answer these charges? Zephira lifted her head, her dark hair falling away from her face to reveal eyes that burned with a mixture of rage and something deeper, something that looked almost like grief. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady despite the chains, despite the cold, despite the fact that she knew what was coming. I answer that these charges are lies spoken by cowards who fear what I represent, she said clearly, making sure every member of the council heard her. I answer that the real traitors stand among you now, wearing masks to hide their guilt. I answer that my brother Driven died defending this pack, and I would sooner cut out my own heart than dishonor his memory by betraying everything he fought for. A murmur ran through the council, a sound like wind through dead leaves. Corvith raised one hand, and the murmuring stopped immediately. He turned to look at the figure standing just outside the circle, the one who had brought these accusations forward. Tavros stepped into the torchlight, and Zephira felt her stomach twist with a hatred so pure it was almost clean. He was her cousin, the son of her mother's brother, and they had grown up together like siblings after Zephira's parents had been killed in a border skirmish. He had slept under the same roof, eaten at the same table, trained alongside her and driven in the ways of the pack. And now he stood there with a face carved from stone, holding a leather satchel that he claimed contained all the proof needed to condemn her. The evidence speaks louder than any denial, Tavros said, his voice smooth and confident. He reached into the satchel and pulled out several rolled parchments, each one sealed with wax. These letters were found hidden in Zephira's chamber, correspondence between her and a wolf named Rendax from the southern packs. In them, she details our patrol routes, the number of warriors we have, the weaknesses in our defenses. In exchange, Rendax promises her wealth and a position of power among his people. He handed the parchments to Corvith, who unrolled them one by one, his hidden eyes scanning the words written there. Zephira watched, her hands clenched into fists, the iron chains digging into her wrists hard enough to draw blood. These are forgeries, she said, her voice rising now, echoing across the valley. I have never ridden to any wolf in the southern packs. I have never betrayed this pack. Tavros is lying, and if you would let me speak, if you would let me defend myself properly, I could prove it. You have spoken enough, another council member interrupted, a woman whose mask bore the symbol of the crescent moon. Her name was Yold, and she had never liked Zephira, had never approved of a female wolf taking on the role of warrior instead of healer or mother. The evidence is clear. The handwriting matches your own. The information in these letters could only have come from someone with access to our inner councils. You had that access because of your brother's position as alpha. You abused that trust. I abused nothing, Zephira shot back, her voice cracking now with the strain of holding back everything she wanted to scream. My brother gave his life for this pack 6 months ago, fighting against the very wolves you now accuse me of conspiring with. Does that mean nothing to you? Does his sacrifice count for nothing? Corvith held up one of the parchments, tilting it so the torchlight fell across the writing. The handwriting did look like hers, Zephira had to admit that much. Someone had gone to great lengths to copy her script, to make these forgeries convincing enough to fool even those who knew her well. The council has reviewed the evidence, Corvith said finally, rolling the parchment back up. We have heard your denial. But denial is not proof of innocence, and the evidence against you is substantial. By the old laws, by the codes that have governed our people since the first wolf walked these mountains, we find you guilty of treason against the pack. The words fell like hammer blows, each one driving Zephira further down into a pit she couldn't climb out of. She looked around the circle, searching for even one face that might show doubt, that might question what was happening. But the masks hid everything, turned the council members into faceless judges whose verdict had already been decided long before she had been dragged here tonight. The punishment for treason is death, Corvith continued, and now his voice carried a note of something that might have been regret, though Zephira couldn't be sure. However, because of your brother's service to the pack, because of the blood you share with those who have led us well in the past, the council has decided to show mercy. You will not be executed. Instead, you will be exiled. Exile. The word hung in the air like a curse. In some ways, it was worse than death. A wolf without a pack was a ghost, a creature neither living nor dead, doomed to wander alone until hunger or enemies or simple madness claimed them. No pack would take in an exile, especially not one branded as a traitor. She would be truly alone in a world that had no place for lone wolves. Tavros stepped forward again, and this time he was holding something else. It was a branding iron, its end shaped into the symbol of a broken circle, the mark of exile that would be burned into her skin so that anyone who saw her would know what she was. No, Zephira said, pulling against her chains even though she knew it was useless. No, you cannot do this. I am innocent. I have done nothing wrong. Hold her, Corvith commanded, and 2 guards moved in from the shadows, large men who grabbed Zephira's arms and forced her to stay still. She fought them, thrashing and snarling like the wolf that lived inside her, but they were stronger and she was already weakened from 3 days in the holding cells beneath the council hall. Tavros heated the iron in one of the torches, watching the metal glow red and then white. He approached Zephira slowly, and for just a moment, their eyes met. She searched his face for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of the cousin she had once known, but there was nothing there. Just cold determination and something else, something that looked almost like satisfaction. This hurts me more than it hurts you, Tavros said quietly, so only she could hear. Liar, Zephira hissed back at him. You wanted this. You planned this. I don't know why yet, but I will find out. I swear to you, Tavros, I will find out, and when I do, I will make you pay for what you have done. He pressed the brand to her left shoulder, just above her heart, and the pain was unlike anything Zephira had ever experienced. It was as if lightning had struck her from the inside out, as if every nerve in her body was on fire. She screamed, the sound tearing from her throat and echoing across the valley, and she hated herself for showing weakness but couldn't stop the sound from coming. The smell of burning flesh filled her nostrils, and through the haze of agony, she heard Corvith speaking the formal words of exile. Zephira, daughter of Morni, you are hereby cast out from the northern pack, he intoned. Your name is stricken from our records. Your bloodline is severed. You are no longer one of us. If you are seen within our territories after sunrise tomorrow, you will be killed on sight. Go now, and may the old gods have mercy on your spirit. The guards released her, and Zephira collapsed to the ground, her shoulder throbbing with pain that made her vision blur. The chains were removed from her wrists, but it hardly mattered. She could barely move, barely think through the waves of pain washing over her. Tavros leaned down, speaking quietly once more so that only she could hear him over the sound of the council members beginning to file away into the darkness. You were always too proud, cousin, he whispered. Too sure of yourself. Your brother was the same way, and look where it got him. Dead in a pointless battle, defending a pack that would have been better served by making peace with the South. I tried to show the council a better path, but Driven stood in my way. And when he was gone, you took his place, speaking against every proposal I made, turning the other warriors against me. You left me no choice but to remove you as well. Zephira tried to grab him, tried to wrap her hands around his throat, but her body wouldn't respond. The pain from the brand had left her weak, shaking, barely able to lift her head. I will kill you for this, she managed to say, each word taking enormous effort. I will come back, and I will kill you. Tavros smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. He straightened up, brushing dirt from his robes. No, you won't, he said. Because you will be dead within a week. The mountains are no place for a lone wolf, especially not in winter. Goodbye, Zephira. I would say I'll miss you, but we both know that would be a lie. He walked away, leaving her there in the stone circle as the torches began to burn low. One by one, they went out, plunging the valley into darkness. Zephira lay on the frozen ground, her shoulder screaming with pain, her mind racing through everything that had happened, everything she had lost. Her pack. Her name. Her honor. Everything her brother had died to protect had been stripped away based on lies and forged letters. And the worst part was that she had no way to prove her innocence, no way to fight back against accusations that had been so carefully constructed. But as she lay there in the darkness, something began to change inside her. The grief and the pain started to harden into something else, something colder and sharper. Tavros had made a mistake. He had assumed that exile would kill her, that the mountains and the winter would finish what his accusations had started. But he had forgotten something important. He had forgotten that she was the sister of Driven, trained by the best warrior the pack had ever known. He had forgotten that she had survived battles that would have broken lesser wolves. And most importantly, he had forgotten that some wolves, when pushed to the edge of death, don't simply fall over the cliff. Some wolves grow wings. Zephira forced herself to sit up, gritting her teeth against the pain. The brand on her shoulder would scar, would mark her forever as an exile and a traitor. But scars could be worn as reminders, as fuel for the fire that was beginning to burn in her chest. She would survive this. She would survive the winter, the mountains, the loneliness. She would grow strong in her exile, stronger than she had ever been as part of the pack. And then, when the time was right, she would return. Not for forgiveness. Not for acceptance. But for revenge. For justice. For the crown that Tavros so clearly wanted for himself. The High Council had branded her a traitor and cast her out to die. But what they had actually done was set loose something far more dangerous than a traitor. They had created an enemy who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. They had created a wolf who would stop at nothing to reclaim what had been stolen from her. Zephira stood on shaking legs, looking back toward the distant lights of the pack settlement. Somewhere in there, Tavros was probably celebrating, thinking himself clever, thinking he had won. But he had only won the first battle. The war was just beginning, and he had no idea what was coming for him. The question that would haunt the northern pack in the months to come was simple, though none of them knew it yet. What happens when you exile a wolf who refuses to die? The first week in the wilderness nearly killed her 3 times. Zephira had always been a capable hunter, had always prided herself on her survival skills, but hunting as part of a pack was vastly different from hunting alone with a shoulder that burned like a living coal every time she moved. The brand had become infected within 2 days, the flesh around it swelling and turning red, fever sweating through her body until she could barely tell the difference between waking and dreaming. She found shelter in a cave halfway up the northern ridge, a place she remembered from training exercises years ago when Driven had still been alive. The cave was shallow but protected from the wind, and there was a small spring nearby that provided fresh water. For 3 days she lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, her body fighting the infection while her mind wandered through memories and nightmares. In her fevered dreams, she saw her brother. Driven had been tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of amber and a laugh that could fill a room. He had taught her everything she knew about fighting, about strategy, about what it meant to be a warrior. When their parents had been killed, he had been the one to hold her while she cried, to promise her that they would be all right, that they would look after each other. And he had kept that promise, right up until the day he died. The southern packs had been raiding the border settlements, stealing livestock and supplies. Driven had led a party of warriors to confront them, to drive them back. The battle had been fierce, and by the end of it, Driven had been cut down by 3 wolves working together. They said he had killed 2 of them before the third got a blade between his ribs. They said his last words had been about protecting the pack, about making sure the settlement was safe. Zephira had wanted to lead the vengeance party, had wanted to ride south and make the enemy pay for what they had done. But Tavros had argued against it, and had convinced the council that more bloodshed would only lead to a larger war that the pack couldn't win. He had pushed for peace talks, for negotiations. And slowly, over the months that followed, he had begun to turn the pack against Zephira, portraying her as reckless, as too emotional, as a threat to the stability he was trying to build. She hadn't seen it coming. Hadn't realized what he was doing until it was too late. And now here she was, burning with fever in a cave, her brother dead, her cousin victorious, her life in ruins. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Zephira woke to find herself weak but clear-headed, the infection in her shoulder finally beginning to heal. She forced herself to eat, to drink, to move even though every muscle in her body screamed in protest. She couldn't afford to stay still any longer. The cave was a shelter, but it wouldn't provide food, and winter was deepening. If she wanted to survive, she needed to start acting like a survivor instead of a victim. She spent the next 2 weeks learning how to hunt alone. It was harder than she had expected. In the pack, hunters worked together, driving prey toward waiting wolves who would make the kill. Alone, she had to rely on stealth and patience, waiting for hours in the snow for a deer or mountain goat to wander close enough for her to strike. She missed more than she caught at first, her weakened body unable to move fast enough, her timing off. But gradually, she began to adapt. She learned to read the land differently, to see opportunities she had never noticed before. She learned to make every movement count, to conserve her energy, to strike only when success was almost certain. The loneliness was worse than hunger. Wolves were pack animals, meant to live and work together. Being alone went against every instinct she had. At night, she would lie in her cave and listen to the wind, and sometimes the wind sounded like voices, like the howls of her former pack calling to each other across the mountains. Those were the hardest moments, when the reality of her situation would crash over her like a wave, when she would remember that she could never go back, that everyone she had known now thought of her as a traitor. But she couldn't afford to dwell on it. Grief was a luxury for those who had time to grieve. Zephira had only one goal now, and that was survival. Everything else, the pain, the anger, the loneliness, all of it had to be pushed down, locked away, saved for later when she would need it as fuel for what was to come. 6 weeks into her exile, she encountered the hermit. She had been tracking a wounded elk through a narrow canyon when she noticed the smoke rising from behind a cluster of rocks. At first, she thought it might be hunters from the pack, and her instinct was to run, to hide. But curiosity got the better of her. She approached carefully, moving from shadow to shadow, until she could see the source of the smoke. It was a small campfire, and beside it sat an old woman wearing clothes made from animal skins stitched together with sinew. Her hair was white and hung down past her waist, and her face was so wrinkled it looked like dried leather. But her eyes, when they turned to look directly at Zephira's hiding spot, were sharp and bright as cut glass. "You can stop skulking in the shadows, child," the old woman called out, her voice surprisingly strong. "If I wanted you dead, you would be dead already. Come, sit. Share my fire. You look half frozen and fully starved." Zephira hesitated, every instinct telling her to run. But the promise of warmth, of another voice besides her own thoughts, was too tempting to resist. She emerged from her hiding place, keeping her hands visible, showing she meant no threat. The old woman studied her for a long moment, her gaze lingering on the brand visible on Zephira's shoulder where her torn shirt had slipped. Then she nodded, as if confirming something she had already suspected. "Exile," the old woman said simply. "I thought I smelled one nearby. Sit down before you fall down. I have stew cooking, and there is enough for two." Zephira sat, her body relaxing despite herself. The fire was warm, and the smell of the stew made her stomach clench with hunger. She hadn't had a proper meal in weeks, just whatever she could catch and eat raw or barely cooked over a small fire. "Who are you?" Zephira asked, accepting a bowl of stew that the old woman handed her. The first bite was heaven, rich with meat and herbs she couldn't identify. "I am called Breska," the old woman replied, settling back against a rock. "And I, like you, am an exile. Though my exile came so long ago that most of those who cast me out are long dead and turned to dust." "How long have you been out here?" Zephira asked, spooning more stew into her mouth. She was trying not to eat too fast, but it was difficult. 40 years, perhaps 45, Breska said casually, as if discussing the weather. "I stopped counting after the first decade. Time loses meaning when you live alone. Days blend together, seasons come and go. What matters is that I am still here, still breathing, still surviving. And that is more than most exiles can say." 40 years. Zephira tried to imagine living alone for that long and couldn't. The thought was terrifying, a future stretching out endlessly with nothing but solitude and survival. "How do you do it?" she asked quietly, setting down her empty bowl. "How do you survive alone for so long without going mad?" Breska smiled, showing teeth that were surprisingly intact for someone of her age. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small skin of what smelled like strong alcohol, taking a sip before offering it to Zephira. "You survive by finding purpose," Breska said. "The pack gave you purpose before. It told you who to be, what to do, how to think. Without the pack, you must create your own purpose. You must decide what you are living for. Otherwise, yes, the madness will come. It always does for those who cannot answer that question." Zephira took a small sip of the alcohol, feeling it burn down her throat. She handed the skin back, considering Breska's words. "What is your purpose?" she asked the old woman. "Knowledge," Breska replied immediately. "I was exiled because I questioned the old ways, because I wanted to understand things that the pack elders said should not be questioned. Out here, I am free to learn whatever I wish, to experiment, to discover. I have learned things about the old magics, about the bond between human and wolf, that would make the council's hair stand on end. And I have used that knowledge to survive, to thrive even, in a world that tried to kill me." Old magics. Zephira had heard stories, of course. Every pack had legends about the ancient times when the bond between human and wolf had been stronger, when transformation had been easier, when some wolves had been able to do things that seemed impossible. But she had always assumed they were just stories, myths to entertain children. "Are the old magics real?" she asked, unable to keep the skepticism out of her voice. Breska laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. She stood up, moving with a grace that belied her age, and walked a few steps away from the fire. Then, without any warning or visible effort, she began to change. Her body shifted and flowed, bones restructuring, muscles rearranging, until where an old woman had stood, there was now a white wolf with those same bright, intelligent eyes. Zephira stared, her mouth falling open. She had seen transformations before, of course. All pack members could shift between human and wolf forms. But it always required effort, concentration, and a moment of vulnerability. And yet Breska had done it as easily as breathing, with no strain visible at all. The white wolf transformed back into the old woman, who settled back down beside the fire with a satisfied expression. "The old magics are very real, child," Breska said. "The packs have forgotten most of them, or locked them away out of fear. But they still exist, waiting for those brave enough or desperate enough to seek them out. And you, I think, are both brave and desperate. Are you not?" Zephira nodded slowly, her mind racing. If she could learn what Breska knew, if she could master abilities that the pack had forgotten, then maybe, just maybe, she would have a chance when she returned. Maybe she could be more than just another exile seeking revenge. Maybe she could be something the pack had never seen before. "Teach me," she said, leaning forward. "Please. I need to become stronger. I need to learn everything you know." Breska studied her for a long moment, those sharp eyes seeming to look right through Zephyr's skin to the determination burning underneath. "Learning what I know will not be easy," the old woman warned. "It will require you to push past limits you thought were absolute. It will hurt. It will change you in ways you cannot predict. And there is no guarantee that you will survive the process. Many who have tried to walk this path have died in the attempt. Are you willing to pay that price?" Zephira thought about Tavros, about the smug satisfaction on his face as he had pressed the brand to her skin. She thought about the council members who had condemned her without truly listening. She thought about her brother, dead because he had been honorable and straightforward in a world that rewarded treachery and lies. "Yes," she said firmly. "I am willing to pay whatever price is necessary. Teach me, and I will prove myself worthy of the knowledge." Breska smiled again, and this time there was something almost predatory in the expression, something that reminded Zephira that this old woman had survived alone in the wilderness for over 4 decades and had clearly thrived doing it. "Very well," Breska said. "We will begin tomorrow at dawn. Tonight, you rest. Because once we start, there will be no rest, no mercy, no turning back. I will push you to the breaking point and beyond. And when we are done, if you survive, you will be something that the Northern Pack has never seen before. You will be a weapon forged in exile, tempered by suffering, sharpened by rage. And when you return to them, they will learn too late what they have created." That night, Zephira slept beside Breska's fire, warm and fed for the first time in weeks. And in her dreams, she was no longer running or hiding. In her dreams, she was hunting. And her prey wore masks of white bone and spoke with Tavros's voice. The training began before sunrise. Breska woke Zephira by dumping a bucket of ice-cold water over her head, and when Zephira sputtered and gasped, the old woman just laughed and told her to get up, that they were wasting moonlight. The first lesson had nothing to do with magic or combat. Instead, Breska led Zephira on a run through the mountains, a brutal pace that had Zephira's lungs burning and her legs screaming within the first hour. But whenever she slowed, Breska would be there, pushing her, demanding more, never letting her stop to rest. The pack taught you to run with others, to pace yourself for the group, Breska explained as they climbed a particularly steep section of trail. But you are not part of a group anymore. You must learn to push past the limits that pack running imposed on you. Your body can do far more than you think. It is your mind that holds you back. They ran for 6 hours straight, and by the end of it, Zephira collapsed in the snow, her vision blurred, her body shaking with exhaustion. Breska handed her water and a piece of dried meat, waiting patiently while Zephira recovered enough to sit up. How far did we run? Zephira managed to ask between gasps for air. 20 miles, perhaps 25, Breska replied casually. Tomorrow we will go farther. And the day after that, farther still. Within a month, you will be able to run 50 miles without stopping. Within 2 months, you will barely feel winded doing it. Zephira wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the claim, but she was too tired. Instead, she just ate her dried meat and tried to convince her legs that they would need to work again eventually. The running continued every morning, gradually building Zephira's endurance to levels she had never thought possible. But the afternoons were dedicated to what Breska called the inner work, the cultivation of the old magics that flowed through the blood of all wolf kinds but which most never learned to access properly. The transformation between human and wolf, Breska explained during one of their early lessons, is the most basic expression of the magic within you. But it is crude, inefficient. You pour enormous amounts of energy into reshaping your entire body when you could be using that energy for other purposes. The first step in mastering the old ways is learning to transform partially, to take only the aspects of your wolf form that you need in any given moment. She demonstrated, her right hand shifting into a wolf's paw with claws extended, while the rest of her body remained human. Then the paw shifted back, and her eyes changed instead, becoming wolf eyes with their superior night vision and ability to detect movement. Each partial transformation flowed as smoothly as water, with no wasted motion or energy. Zephira tried to copy her, focusing on just her hand, imagining it changing. Nothing happened. She tried again, concentrating harder. Still nothing. For 3 hours she sat there, staring at her hand, willing it to change, while Breska watched with an expression of infinite patience. You are trying to force it, Breska said finally. The magic does not respond to force. It responds to intention, to clarity of purpose. You must know exactly what you want and why you want it. The magic will follow your certainty. Zephira closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She thought about her brother, about the last time she had seen him alive. He had been teasing her about her fighting stance, showing her how to adjust her footwork. His hands had been strong and calloused from years of weapons training. She remembered wanting hands like that, hands that spoke of competence and power. When she opened her eyes and looked down, her right hand had shifted. Not into a paw, but into something halfway between human and wolf, fingers elongated and tipped with claws, bones and muscles restructured for greater strength. It wasn't what Breska had demonstrated, but it was a start. Good, Breska said, a note of approval in her voice. Not what I showed you, but good nonetheless. The magic responds to your true intentions, not to what you think you should want. Your intention was for strength, for the ability to fight. So that is what the magic gave you. Now, hold that form. Learn how it feels. And then practice shifting back and forth until it becomes as natural as breathing. The months that followed were a blur of training and discovery. Zephira learned to shift individual body parts at will, to enhance her senses, to move with a speed and grace that would have been impossible for her before. But the physical training was only part of what Breska taught her. The old woman also shared knowledge that the packs had forgotten or suppressed, secrets about the nature of their kind that rewrote everything Zephira thought she knew. We are not simply humans who can turn into wolves, Breska explained one night as they sat by the fire. That is the lie the packs tell themselves to feel more civilized, more acceptable. The truth is far older and stranger. We are something that existed before humans and wolves separated into different species. We are the bridge between them, the reminder that the boundaries we think are absolute are actually fluid and permeable. The old magics tap into that ancient nature, allowing us to become what we were always meant to be. She taught Zephira techniques that had been forbidden by the packs for generations. How to enter a state of heightened awareness where time seemed to slow down, where she could see the patterns in an opponent's movements before they happened. How to draw on the strength of the earth itself, pulling energy up through her feet when her own reserves were depleted. How to mask her scent so completely that even other wolves couldn't track her. How to project her voice across miles, a skill the old alphas had used to coordinate hunts before the packs became so large and organized. But the most valuable lesson Breska taught her had nothing to do with magic or combat skills. It was about strategy, about understanding the true nature of power within the pack structure. You want revenge against those who wronged you, Breska said bluntly one evening, about 5 months into Zephira's training. That is fine, revenge is a worthy goal. But revenge alone is not enough. You can kill Tavros, cut his throat while he sleeps, and then what? The pack will hunt you down and kill you in turn. You will have your revenge, but you will not survive it. Is that what you want? Zephira thought about it, really thought about it. And she realized that no, simple revenge wasn't enough. She wanted more than just Tavros's death. She wanted vindication. She wanted everyone who had stood by and watched her exile to know that they had been wrong. She wanted to reclaim not just her life, but her honor. I want them to see the truth, she said slowly. I want them to know that Tavros lied, that I was innocent. I want my name restored. Then you cannot simply kill him, Breska pointed out. You must expose him. You must make him reveal his treachery in front of witnesses that cannot be ignored. And to do that, you must understand how he thinks, how he operates, what his ultimate goal is. Only then can you turn his own plans against him. They spent weeks discussing strategy, war games played out with stones on a board that Breska drew in the dirt. Zephira learned to think several moves ahead, to anticipate how an opponent would react, to set traps that looked like opportunities. She learned that the strongest position was often the one that appeared weakest, because it invited careless attacks. She learned that patience was a weapon sharper than any blade. As winter gave way to spring, Zephira barely recognized herself. Her body had been transformed by the months of brutal training, lean and hard with muscle, capable of feats that would have seemed impossible before. Her skills with the old magics had grown to the point where she could shift forms as easily as Breska, could move through the forest like a ghost, could fight with a speed and ferocity that came from perfect control over every aspect of her enhanced body. But more than that, her mind had been sharpened. She no longer thought like a simple warrior following orders. She thought like a strategist, like someone who understood that true victory came not from strength alone but from using your enemy's weaknesses against them. You are ready, Breska announced one morning as the snow finally melted from the high peaks. There is nothing more I can teach you that you will not learn better through experience. Now you must decide. Will you return to your pack and claim what was taken from you? Or will you remain here, living as I have lived, free but alone? Zephira looked toward the south, toward the territories where the northern pack made their home. Part of her was tempted to stay, to remain in the wilderness where she had found a strange kind of peace. But the larger part, the part that had been forged in the fires of exile and tempered by Breska's teaching, knew that her story with the pack was not finished. It could not be finished until Tavros faced justice and her name was cleared. I will return, she said firmly. But not yet. First, I need to understand what has been happening in my absence. I need information before I can make my move. Breska nodded approvingly. She reached into her belongings and pulled out a small leather pouch, handing it to Zephira. Inside you will find herbs that can change your appearance temporarily, the old woman explained. Darken your hair, alter the shape of your face enough that casual observers will not recognize you. Use them wisely. And remember everything I have taught you. Trust your instincts, but verify with evidence. Move like water, not like stone. And when the moment comes to strike, do not hesitate. Zephira took the pouch, feeling the weight of it in her hand. Then she embraced Breska, this old woman who had saved her life and given her the tools to reclaim it. Thank you, she said simply, because there were no words adequate to express what Breska's teaching had meant to her. Do not thank me yet, Breska replied with a slight smile. Wait until you have won. Then, if you wish, come back and tell me the story of your victory. I would very much like to hear how it ends. Zephira left the next morning, traveling south through passes that were finally clear of snow. She moved faster than she ever had before, covering in 2 days what would have taken her a week during her first days of exile. And as she ran, she felt the strength in her body, the clarity in her mind, the purpose burning in her heart. She was no longer the broken exile who had crawled into the wilderness to die. She was something new, something dangerous. She was a wolf who had learned to hunt without a pack. And soon, very soon, the pack would learn what that meant. Zephira spent 2 weeks observing the northern pack's main settlement from hiding, using the skills Breska had taught her to remain undetected. She watched the patterns of the guards, noted who had risen in status during her absence, and most importantly, listened to the gossip that flowed through the market square where pack members gathered to trade and share news. What she learned both surprised and disturbed her. Tavros had not become alpha, as she had expected. Instead, he had taken the position of chief advisor to the new alpha, a young wolf named Grendak who had come from one of the lesser bloodlines. Grendak was strong but not particularly intelligent, and from what Zephira could observe, he relied heavily on Tavros for guidance in all matters of importance. It was a clever arrangement. Tavros wielded all the real power without bearing the weight of leadership or the scrutiny that came with the alpha's position. More concerning was what had happened to the pack itself. In the 9 months since Zephira's exile, the northern pack had undergone significant changes. Tavros had negotiated a peace treaty with the southern packs, opening trade routes and establishing regular contact with wolves who had been enemies for generations. On the surface, this seemed positive. The raids had stopped, resources were flowing more freely, and there had been no major conflicts. But Zephira noticed other things. The warriors seemed less vigilant, more relaxed. The old traditions that had defined the pack were being quietly set aside in favor of new customs borrowed from the south. And there were strangers living within the settlement now, southern wolves who had been granted permission to establish a trading post within northern territory. It smelled wrong to Zephira, though she couldn't quite articulate why. Perhaps it was just her own prejudice, her hatred of Tavros coloring everything she observed. Or perhaps it was something deeper, some instinct warning her that things were not as peaceful as they appeared. She needed to get closer, to learn more. The herbs Breska had given her would change her appearance, but they wouldn't hold up to close scrutiny from anyone who had known her well. She needed a role that would let her move through the settlement without drawing attention, something that would give her access to information without requiring extensive interaction. The answer came when she observed a group of traveling merchants entering the settlement. They were from the far northern territories, wolves from a dozen different packs and bloodlines who made their living moving goods between settlements. They were welcomed but not integrated, allowed to trade and leave without much examination. Perfect. Zephira used the herbs to darken her hair from its natural brown to black, and applied a paste that subtly altered the structure of her face, making her cheekbones higher and her nose slightly broader. She bound her breasts to appear less feminine, and dressed in the rough traveling clothes she had taken from a cache she had hidden before her exile. When she looked at her reflection in a still pool, she barely recognized herself. Good. If she couldn't recognize herself, neither would anyone else. She approached the settlement at dusk, falling in with a group of merchants who were returning from the far territories. She claimed to be a lone trader named Kale, specializing in medicinal herbs and rare plants from the deep forests. The merchants accepted her presence without much question. Lone wolves were common enough among trading groups, individuals who preferred the freedom of the road to the constraints of pack life. The guards at the settlement gates gave her only a cursory glance before waving her through. Zephira felt a strange mixture of relief and bitterness. 9 months ago, these same guards would have recognized her instantly, would have greeted her with respect as the sister of their fallen alpha. Now she walked past them as a stranger, invisible, forgotten. She set up a small stall in the market square, laying out various herbs and plants she had gathered during her approach. Some were genuinely medicinal. Others were simply common plants that looked exotic enough to justify modest prices. She wasn't trying to make money. She was trying to create a reason to be present, to listen, to observe. And observe she did. Over the next several days, she pieced together a more complete picture of what had happened during her exile. The peace treaty with the southern packs had been Tavros's crowning achievement, the thing that had secured his position of influence. But it had come at a cost that few pack members seemed to fully understand. The northern pack had agreed to share hunting territories, to allow southern wolves to pass through their lands, and most significantly, to provide regular shipments of iron ore from the mines in the northern mountains. In exchange, the south provided food, cloth, and other goods. On the surface, it was a fair trade. But Zephira, with her strategic training from Breska, saw the flaw immediately. The North was giving away its greatest strategic asset, the iron that had always given their warriors an edge in terms of weapons and armor. And in exchange, they were receiving things they could produce themselves with a little effort. It was a trade that benefited the South far more than the North, and over time it would make the Northern pack dependent on Southern goodwill for their basic needs. Worse, she discovered that Tavros had been making regular trips to Southern territory, supposedly to negotiate trade details. But the timing of these trips was suspicious. They seemed to coincide with important pack decisions, as if Tavros was consulting with someone before making recommendations to Grendak. Zephira was contemplating how to investigate further when she saw something that made her blood run cold. Walking through the market square, accompanied by 2 guards, was a southern wolf she recognized from the intelligence briefings Driven used to share with her. His name was Rendax, and he was not just any southern wolf. He was the nephew of the Southern Alpha, a high-ranking warrior who had been involved in numerous raids against northern settlements. And here he was, walking freely through the settlement as if he belonged there, smiling and nodding to pack members who seemed to accept his presence as normal. Rendax was the name that had appeared in the forged letters, the southern wolf Zephira had supposedly been conspiring with. His presence here was no coincidence. Zephira kept her head down as he passed, but she watched him from the corner of her eye, noting everything about him. The way he moved with casual confidence, the expensive quality of his clothes, the deference the guards showed him. This was not a simple trader or diplomat. This was someone with significant influence, someone who had been welcomed into the heart of the Northern Pack's power structure. That night, using the skills Breska had taught her, Zephira followed Rendax. She moved through the shadows like smoke, her scent masked, her footsteps silent. She watched as he entered a large building near the center of the settlement, one that had been converted into quarters for visiting dignitaries. And she watched as, an hour later, Tavros entered the same building. She couldn't get close enough to hear what they discussed, but she didn't need to. The simple fact of their meeting, conducted privately after dark, told her everything she needed to know. Tavros and Rendax were working together, and had probably been working together for some time. The forged letters had been just the beginning. Whatever they were planning, it was bigger than simply removing Zephira from the picture. She needed proof, something concrete that she could present to the pack. But getting that proof would mean taking risks, getting closer to Tavros and Rendax than was safe. One wrong move, one moment of recognition, and everything would fall apart. Zephira returned to her small rented room above a tannery, her mind racing with possibilities. She had been planning to expose Tavros eventually, but she had assumed she would have more time to prepare, to set up her pieces properly. Now she wondered if waiting was the right strategy. Every day that passed was another day for Tavros and Rendax to advance whatever scheme they were pursuing. Every day was another day that the Northern Pack moved closer to a danger they couldn't see. But rushing in without adequate preparation would be just as bad. She needed to be smart about this, to play the game the way Breska had taught her. She needed to find the vulnerability in their plan, the weak point she could exploit. And most importantly, she needed allies. She couldn't do this alone, not against opponents who had the trust of the Alpha and the support of powerful southern wolves. The question was, who in the pack would be willing to help an exile? Who would believe her over Tavros? The answer, she realized, was almost no one. Not without evidence so overwhelming that it couldn't be denied. Which meant she needed to create a situation where Tavros would expose himself, where his treachery would become undeniable even to those who currently trusted him. An idea began to form in her mind, dangerous and audacious. It would require perfect timing, nerves of steel, and more than a little luck. But if it worked, it would give her everything she needed. Not just revenge, but justice. Not just vindication, but the truth. Tomorrow, she decided, she would put the first pieces of her plan into motion. And if the old gods were watching, if her brother's spirit was guiding her, then maybe, just maybe, she would survive long enough to see it through to the end. Zephira's plan required her to do something incredibly risky. She needed to get caught. Not as herself, but as Kale the merchant, doing something suspicious enough to warrant questioning but not so serious that she would be executed on sight. She needed to create an opportunity for information to surface, information that would lead the pack to start questioning Tavros's story about her exile. She spent 3 days carefully preparing. First, she created a false trail, evidence of a merchant who had been asking too many questions about military matters, about guard rotations and patrol routes. She made sure these inquiries were noticed but attributed them to simple merchant curiosity rather than active spying. Then she arranged for a certain letter to be found in her room, a letter that would appear to be correspondence from the southern territories but which would actually be a forgery she created herself, using techniques Breska had taught her. The letter was carefully worded. It referenced the earlier accusations against Zephira, suggesting that perhaps the evidence against her had been manufactured. It hinted at a larger conspiracy without providing enough detail to be immediately useful. Most importantly, it was written in a way that would make anyone reading it want to investigate further rather than simply dismiss it as the ravings of a conspiracy theorist. On the 4th day, she made sure to be seen near the northern gate at an unusual hour, carrying a satchel that appeared to contain documents. When the guards challenged her, she acted nervous, furtive, exactly like someone who had something to hide. She let them catch her. She let them find the letter. Within hours, she was in a cell beneath the council hall, the very same cell where she had been held during her own trial. The irony was not lost on her. Guards questioned her, asking who she really was, who she was working for, what she knew about the matters mentioned in the letter. She gave them nothing useful, playing the role of a confused merchant who had gotten in over their head. But she made sure they knew that the letter had come from Southern Territory, that there were people there who knew the truth about what had happened 9 months ago. The questioning went on for 2 days. Zephira endured it patiently, giving small pieces of information designed to intrigue rather than satisfy. She could feel the guards' frustration growing, their certainty that she knew more than she was saying. Perfect. That frustration would push them to escalate the matter, to bring it to the attention of higher authorities. On the 3rd day, as she had anticipated, Tavros came to see her. He entered the cell alone, confident in his power, certain that this merchant posed no real threat to him. He sat across from her in the dim light, studying her altered face with an expression of mild curiosity. "You have been asking questions about matters that do not concern merchants," Tavros said quietly, his voice carrying that same smooth confidence she remembered. "You possess letters that suggest knowledge of pack internal affairs. Who are you really, Kale?" And who sent you here? Zephira kept her head down, her body language submissive. But inside, her heart was racing. This was the moment. If Tavros recognized her, if he saw through her disguise, everything would collapse. But if her disguise held, if she could manipulate this conversation correctly, she could plant seeds of doubt that would grow into the exposure she needed. I am just a merchant, she said, keeping her voice lower and rougher than her natural tone. I buy and sell information along with herbs. Someone in the south paid me to deliver that letter to someone in the pack, someone who might be sympathetic to investigating old accusations. I did not know it would cause such trouble. Who in the south? Tavros demanded, leaning forward. Give me a name. I do not have a name, Zephira lied. It was arranged through intermediaries. But the person seemed very certain that there were wolves here who would want to know the truth about the exile of someone named Zephira. They said she had been innocent, that the evidence against her had been fabricated. Is that true? She watched Tavros's face carefully, saw the brief flicker of something that might have been concern before his expression smoothed back into calm authority. Zephira was guilty of treason, Tavros said firmly. The evidence was examined by the full council. There is no conspiracy, no fabrication. Whoever sent you here with these lies is trying to sow discord within the pack. You have been used, merchant. The question is whether you will help us identify who used you, or whether you will be punished as a willing participant in their scheme. I will help however I can, Zephira said quickly, still playing the frightened merchant. I want no trouble with the northern pack. I will tell you everything I know. And she did, feeding him a carefully constructed story about contacts in the south, about rumors she had heard in her travels, about suggestions that the peace treaty between North and South had been built on foundations that were not as solid as they appeared. She gave him just enough truth mixed with lies to make him uncertain about what she actually knew and what she was guessing at. When Tavros finally left, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight rigidity in his walk that suggested worry. Good. Let him worry. Let him wonder how much the South actually knew, how secure his position really was. Worried people made mistakes, and she was counting on Tavros to make a big one. The next day, she was released. The official word was that she was simply a foolish merchant who had been used by unknown parties to spread false information. She was banned from the settlement and told to leave immediately. Zephira gathered her things and departed, making sure to seem appropriately chastened and eager to leave. But she didn't go far. Using the stealth techniques Breska had taught her, she circled back, finding a hiding spot in the forest overlooking the settlement. That night, as she had hoped, Tavros met with Rendax again. But this time, there was a third person at the meeting, someone Zephira hadn't expected to see. It was Yold, the council member who had been so eager to condemn Zephira during her trial. The three of them met in a small building at the edge of the settlement, speaking in hushed voices that Zephira couldn't quite make out even with her enhanced hearing. But she didn't need to hear their words. The simple fact of the meeting was enough. Yold was involved in whatever conspiracy Tavros and Rendax had constructed. A council member, one of the 12 who were supposed to be the pack's most trusted leaders, was working with their enemies. Zephira watched until the meeting ended, until all three participants had departed. Then she made her way back into the forest, her mind working through the implications. If Yold was involved, who else on the council might be compromised? How deep did this conspiracy go? And most importantly, how could she expose it in a way that would be believed? The answer came to her as she sat in the darkness, watching the settlement's lights flicker. She couldn't expose the conspiracy from the outside. She needed to be on the inside when it happened. She needed to be present, visible, and undeniable when the truth came out. Which meant she needed to stop hiding. She needed to reveal herself, but on her own terms, in a way that would force the pack to listen before they condemned her again. The annual gathering of the full pack was in 2 weeks, a ceremony that brought together wolves from all the outlying settlements for celebration and renewal of oaths. Every pack member was expected to attend, and the High Council would be present in full force. It would be the perfect opportunity. But it would also be incredibly dangerous. If she revealed herself too soon, if she miscalculated the mood of the pack, she would be seized and executed before she could say a word in her own defense. She needed leverage, something that would force the pack to pause, to listen. And she thought she knew what that leverage might be. The iron shipments that the North had been sending south as part of the peace treaty, they were scheduled and regular. If one of those shipments were to go missing, if it could be made to appear that Southern wolves had stolen it in violation of the treaty, it would create exactly the kind of crisis she needed. A crisis that would shake the pack's faith in Tavros's peace, that would make them question whether they had been wise to trust their former enemies. It was manipulation, pure and simple. But Zephira had learned from Breska that survival often required using your enemy's expectations against them. Tavros expected her to be dead or broken, too weak to threaten him. Rendax expected the Northern Pack to remain trusting and complacent. They had built their conspiracy on the assumption that no one would challenge the new order they had created. It was time to prove them wrong. It was time to remind them that some wolves, when pushed to the edge, don't fall. They fly. The iron shipment disappeared on a foggy morning 3 days before the gathering. Zephira had planned it meticulously, using her knowledge of the old patrol routes and her ability to move unseen. She didn't steal the iron herself. Instead, she created evidence that pointed to Southern wolves, tracks leading south, scraps of cloth bearing Southern colors left carelessly behind. The warriors who discovered the missing shipment would follow those tracks, would find that evidence, and would draw exactly the conclusion she wanted them to draw. By that afternoon, the settlement was in an uproar. The missing iron represented a significant loss, but more than that, it represented a betrayal of the peace treaty. Warriors who had been reluctant about the alliance with the South now spoke openly about their suspicions. Grendak called an emergency council meeting, and though Zephira couldn't observe it directly, she heard the results soon enough. The annual gathering would proceed as planned, but there would also be a formal inquiry into the missing shipment, and representatives from the Southern packs had been summoned to answer for the apparent theft. Perfect. Zephira had created chaos, and in chaos there was opportunity. Now she just had to survive long enough to exploit it. The night before the gathering, she shed her disguise completely. She washed the darkening agent from her hair, removed the paste that had altered her face, and dressed in clothes that, while simple, were well made and clean. She looked like herself again, or at least like a version of herself that had been hardened by 9 months of exile and training. The brand on her shoulder was visible where her shirt didn't quite cover it, a permanent reminder of what had been done to her. She entered the gathering grounds just after dawn, walking openly through the main path rather than sneaking in. Wolves were already assembling, hundreds of them from settlements across the northern territories. She moved through the crowd with purpose, heading toward the central platform where the High Council would soon conduct their ceremonies. People stared at her as she passed. Some didn't recognize her immediately. Others did, and their expressions ranged from shock to horror to confusion. By the time she reached the platform, a crowd had begun to gather around her. Warriors were moving in, hands on their weapons, uncertain whether to attack or wait for orders. And standing on the platform itself, his face a mask of shock and dawning fury, was Tavros. "Seize her," he commanded, his voice cutting through the murmuring crowd. "That is Zephira, the exile. She has returned in violation of her sentence. She must be executed immediately." Warriors moved toward her, but Zephira raised her hand, her voice ringing out clear and strong across the gathering grounds. "I am Zephira, daughter of Morni, sister to Driven who died defending this pack," she declared. "I am the wolf who was falsely accused and wrongly exiled. And I have returned not to beg for mercy, but to demand justice. I have returned to expose the traitors who walk among you, who have sold this pack's future to our enemies while hiding behind lies and false accusations. The warriors hesitated. They should have seized her already, but something in her bearing, in the absolute certainty of her words, made them pause. Grendak stepped forward, his young face troubled. "You were found guilty by the council," he said, though his tone lacked complete conviction. "You were given mercy in the form of exile rather than death. Why should we listen to anything you have to say?" "Because I can prove my innocence," Zephira replied. "Because I can show you who the real traitors are. Because the wolf who accused me, who created false evidence against me, has been conspiring with our enemies since before my brother died. Tavros, your chief advisor, is the one who should be standing here in chains, not me." Tavros laughed, but it sounded forced. He descended from the platform, moving toward Zephira with confidence that she could see was partly performed. "This is desperation," he announced to the crowd. "The exile has gone mad during her time in the wilderness, and now she returns to spew wild accusations because she cannot accept her guilt. She has no proof, no evidence, nothing but her delusions. Guards, take her." "I have evidence," Zephira said calmly, standing her ground as the warriors approached. "I have evidence of your meetings with Rendax, the southern wolf whose name appeared in the forged letters you used to condemn me. I have evidence of your conspiracy with members of this very council, wolves who have betrayed their oaths for southern gold. And I have evidence that the missing iron shipment, the one that has caused such concern, was not actually taken by southern raiders as you would have everyone believe." That stopped the warriors again. Grendak held up his hand, preventing them from seizing Zephira immediately. The young Alpha looked uncertain, caught between his trust in Tavros and the specific, confident nature of Zephira's accusations. "What do you know about the missing shipment?" Grendak demanded. "If you have information about that theft, you must share it." "I know that it was not a theft," Zephira replied. "I know that Tavros arranged for that shipment to disappear so that he could use the crisis to push this pack further toward war with the South, a war that would benefit him and his co-conspirators. Think about it, Alpha. The peace treaty has made us dependent on southern goods while giving them our iron. Now that iron has supposedly been stolen, what do you think happens next? We go to war, we are weakened by fighting, and the South, which has been stockpiling our iron and knows all our defenses because Tavros has been sharing that information, crushes us. The northern pack becomes a vassal of the South, and Tavros, who has been their agent all along, becomes the alpha of what remains. It was a gamble, because some of what she was saying was speculation rather than proven fact. But it was speculation based on months of observation, on strategic training from Breska, on the pattern of events she had witnessed. And from the look on Tavros's face, the flash of something that might have been fear, she knew she had struck close to the truth. "These are lies," Tavros said, but his voice had lost some of its smooth confidence. "She has no evidence, no proof. She is inventing a conspiracy to save her own life." "Then let me prove it," Zephira challenged. "Let me fight for the truth. The old laws allow for trial by combat, do they not? If I am lying, if I am truly the traitor you claim, then defeat me in front of the pack and my lies will die with me. But if I win, if I prove my strength and my conviction, then the pack must listen to the evidence I have gathered. They must investigate the claims I have made. Are you willing to face me, Tavros? Are you willing to let the old gods decide who speaks truth and who speaks lies?" The crowd had grown large now, with more pack members arriving every moment. The murmuring rose to a roar as they debated among themselves. Trial by combat was ancient, rarely used in modern times, but still recognized in the pack laws. If Zephira issued a formal challenge, and if Tavros accepted, the combat would be binding. The victor's claim would be considered validated by the old powers, by forces older than the pack itself. Corveth stepped forward, his council mask hiding his expression but his body language suggesting deep thought. When he spoke, his gravelly voice cut through the noise. "The challenge is valid under the old laws," he announced. "Tavros, as the accused, you have the right to accept or decline. But know that if you decline, it will be seen as an admission of uncertainty. The pack will wonder why you refused to prove your innocence through combat." It was a trap, and Tavros knew it. If he refused, he would look weak, cowardly, and Zephira's accusations would gain credibility simply from his refusal to defend himself. But if he accepted, he would be fighting a wolf who had spent 9 months training with a master of the old ways, a wolf who had been forged into a weapon during her exile. Zephira saw the calculation in his eyes, saw him weighing his options. Then she saw him reach a decision, saw the arrogance that had always been his weakness rise to the surface. "I accept the challenge," Tavros declared, his voice regaining its confidence. "I will prove before the pack that Zephira is a liar and a traitor. And when I have defeated her, when her blood stains this ground, let that be the end of her poisonous accusations." The crowd erupted in approval and excitement. Trial by combat was entertainment as well as justice, and pack members who had been arriving for celebration now had an unexpected spectacle to witness. A space was cleared in the center of the gathering grounds, a circle marked out with stones that designated the combat area. Both Zephira and Tavros were given time to prepare, to stretch, to ready themselves for the fight. Zephira used the time to center herself, to draw on everything Breska had taught her. She cleared her mind of anger, of hatred, of all the emotions that might cloud her judgment. This fight wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about the truth. If she let her personal feelings take control, she would make mistakes, and mistakes in combat were often fatal. When they finally faced each other across the circle, the entire pack had gathered to watch. Hundreds of eyes focused on the two wolves standing in the center of the gathering grounds. Corvith stood at the edge of the circle, ready to signal the start of combat. "This combat will continue until one fighter yields, is unable to continue, or is killed," Corvith announced formally. "The victor's claim will be recognized as validated. The defeated's claim will be considered false. By the old laws and the will of the gods, let the combat begin." Tavros transformed immediately, choosing his full wolf form for the fight. He was large and powerful in that shape, brown fur marked with black along his spine, teeth bared in a snarl that promised violence. It was a statement of intent, a declaration that he planned to end this quickly and brutally. Zephira, however, did something that made the crowd gasp. She transformed only partially, using the techniques Breska had taught her to take a hybrid form that no one in the pack had seen before. Her body remained mostly human but restructured for greater strength and speed. Her hands became clawed, her teeth elongated, her senses enhanced to wolf acuity. She kept the advantages of both forms while minimizing the weaknesses of each. Tavros hesitated, clearly surprised by the form she had taken. That hesitation cost him. Zephira moved with blinding speed, crossing the distance between them before he could react. She struck low and hard, claws raking across his shoulder, drawing first blood. The crowd roared its approval. Tavros recovered quickly, lunging at her with jaws wide. But Zephira was no longer where he expected her to be. She had moved aside, using the enhanced reflexes Breska had trained into her, and as Tavros passed, she struck again, this time at his rear leg. The blow wasn't deep enough to cripple, but it made Tavros stumble, and made him realize that this fight wasn't going to be the easy victory he had anticipated. They circled each other, both bleeding now, both reassessing their opponent. Zephira could see the calculation in Tavros's eyes, and could see him realizing that she had become something dangerous during her exile. She let him see it, let him feel the fear beginning to creep in. Frightened opponents made mistakes. He attacked again, this time with more caution, trying to use his greater mass to force her into a grapple. Zephira avoided the initial charge but then did something unexpected. Instead of continuing to evade, she met his next attack head-on, catching his jaws in her clawed hands and holding them shut with strength that surprised even her. For a moment they stood locked together, Zephira holding the wolf's jaws closed while Tavros thrashed, trying to break free. "I know what you did," she hissed at him, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I know about Rendax. I know about Yold. I know about all of it. And when I finish with you, I am coming for them too." She released him and struck simultaneously, claws raking down his side as he pulled away. More blood flowed, Tavros's brown fur matting with red. He backed up, circling now, his movements more cautious. He transformed back to human form, perhaps thinking that it would give him an advantage in strategy and tactics. "You cannot win," he said loudly, speaking to the crowd as much as to Zephira. "You are just one wolf. I have allies. Even if you somehow defeat me, which you will not, you cannot defeat everyone who stands with me." "Then let them come forward," Zephira challenged, also speaking loudly. "Let everyone who has been part of this conspiracy reveal themselves. Let the pack see how deep the rot goes." She saw movement at the edge of the crowd. Yold was pushing forward, and with her were two other council members whose names Zephira didn't know as well. And behind them, entering the gathering grounds with a small escort of southern wolves, was Rendax himself. "This has gone far enough," Yold announced, removing her council mask to reveal a face twisted with anger. "The exile has no right to challenge anyone. She should have been executed the moment she set foot in our territory. Kill her now, and end this farce." The warriors moved forward again, but this time Grendak stopped them with a sharp gesture. The young Alpha's face had changed, the uncertainty replaced by growing anger as he looked at Yold, at the southern wolves who had entered uninvited. "This is a formal combat under the old laws," Grendak said firmly. "Council member or not, you do not have the authority to stop it. And why are southern wolves here, armed, entering our gathering grounds without permission? What is happening that I do not know about?" Rendak stepped forward, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed victory was already assured. He looked at Zephira with interest rather than hostility, as if examining a particularly clever piece of strategy. "Alpha Grendak, the time for pretense has ended," Rendak said smoothly. "Your pack is surrounded. I have 300 southern warriors in the forest around this gathering ground. Your warriors are unarmed, gathered for celebration rather than combat. If you wish to avoid a slaughter, you will surrender now and accept the terms we offer. The Northern Pack will become part of the Southern Confederation. You will retain nominal leadership, but you will follow our guidance in all important matters. Refuse, and we will destroy you utterly." The gathering grounds exploded into chaos. Pack members shouted in rage and fear. Warriors ran toward the edges of the gathering, searching for weapons, preparing to fight despite being outnumbered and unprepared. Grendak stood frozen, his face showing the horror of a leader who had just realized he had been completely outmaneuvered. But Zephira had been expecting something like this. Tavros's conspiracy had always been building toward this moment, and the missing iron shipment had been designed to create exactly this kind of crisis. What they hadn't expected was for her to be here, to have exposed them before they could execute their plan cleanly. She threw back her head and howled, a sound that carried across the gathering grounds and into the forest beyond. It was not a call of despair or fear. It was a signal, one she had arranged days ago when she had realized how this would unfold. From the forest came answering howls. Not the organized calls of southern warriors, but the wild, untamed voices of dozens of lone wolves, exiles like Zephira who had been living in the wilderness. She had found them during her preparations, had offered them a chance at redemption, at belonging to a pack again if they would help her save the Northern Pack from the conspiracy that threatened it. They had agreed, drawn by her conviction, by the strength she had demonstrated, by the possibility of reclaiming the lives that had been taken from them. And with them came Breska, the old hermit moving through the trees like a ghost, her white fur marking her as something ancient and powerful. She had said she would not interfere, but she had also said she wanted to hear how the story ended. Apparently, she had decided to make sure it ended in a way worth hearing about. Rendax's confidence faltered as he realized that his supposedly surrounded prey had fangs of their own. The southern warriors emerged from the forest, but they found themselves facing not helpless prey but wolves who had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. "Now," Zephira said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "let us finish what we started, Tavros. Let us decide this the way it should be decided. By strength. By truth. By blood." Tavros looked around wildly, searching for support, for escape. But his allies were scattered, and Rendax was busy trying to reorganize his warriors who had suddenly found themselves in a much more even fight than they had anticipated. He transformed again, this time into the hybrid form that Zephira used, perhaps hoping to match her advantage. They came together in a clash that was more savage than strategic, both of them abandoning technique for pure violence. Claws tore flesh, teeth found throats, blood splattered the ground. The crowd pressed in closer, pack members forgetting their fear and the fascination of watching two wolves fight with absolute commitment. Zephira felt pain explode in her side as Tavros's claws found her ribs, felt blood flowing hot down her skin. But she also felt her own claws sink deep into his shoulder, and felt his body shudder with the impact. They broke apart, both wounded, both breathing hard. Around them, the sounds of fighting grew louder as the pack warriors armed themselves with whatever they could find and joined the exiles in pushing back against the southern wolves. "You are finished," Zephira told Tavros, her voice calm despite the pain. "Your conspiracy is exposed. Your allies are fighting for their lives. And you are going to die here, in front of everyone who trusted you, proven as the traitor you always were." "I did what I had to do," Tavros snarled back, blood dripping from his muzzle. "Your brother was leading this pack to ruin with his rigid honor and stupid pride. The South was always stronger. All I did was recognize reality and choose the winning side. That is not treachery. That is survival." "No," Zephira said. "That is cowardice dressed up as pragmatism. My brother died with honor. You will die with shame." She attacked one final time, and this time there was no holding back. She drew on every technique Breska had taught her, every lesson learned during 9 months of exile. She moved like water, like wind, like death itself. Tavros fought back desperately, but he had spent his months in comfort and scheming while she had been forged into a weapon. The outcome was inevitable. Her claws found his throat, and she held him there as his eyes widened, as he realized this was the end. She could have torn out his throat, ended him quickly. Instead, she threw him down at the feet of Grendak and Corvith, who had been watching the combat with expressions of horror and dawning understanding. "I could kill him," Zephira said, her voice carrying across the now quieting gathering grounds. The fighting had stopped, the southern wolves either captured or fled, their leader Rendax lying unconscious where Breska had struck him down with casual efficiency. "But I want him to live long enough to confess. Long enough to name every conspirator, every pack member who betrayed us. And then, when he has told us everything, then I will let the pack decide his fate." Tavros lay bleeding, defeated, his transformation failing as his strength fled. He looked up at the faces surrounding him, at the pack members who had trusted him, and Zephira saw the moment when his will finally broke. "I will tell you everything," he whispered. "Just make it quick. Please." And he did tell them everything. How he had arranged Dreven's death by passing information about the patrol route to southern raiders. How he had forged the letters that condemned Zephira, using her exile to remove the last obstacle to his influence over Grendak. How he had been working with Rendax for over a year, planning the takeover of the Northern Pack. How Yold and the other council members had been promised power and wealth for their cooperation. All of it spilled out in a rush of confession as he lay there, bleeding and broken. When he finished, silence fell over the gathering grounds. Then Corvith spoke, his old voice heavy with grief and anger. "I sentence you to death for treason against the pack," the elder counselor pronounced. Your name will be stricken from all records. Your bloodline is ended. And your body will be burned without ceremony, as befits one who has betrayed everything our people stand for. Tavros didn't protest, didn't beg. He simply closed his eyes and waited. Grendak, his face pale with the understanding of how badly he had been manipulated, stepped forward and delivered the execution blow himself. It was quick, as Tavros had requested, more mercy than he probably deserved. As Tavros's body was carried away, Grendak turned to Zephira. The young Alpha looked older now, aged by the crisis, by the realization of how close the pack had come to destruction. You saved us, he said simply. You saved us all. I do not know how to repay such a debt. Restore my name, Zephira replied. Acknowledge publicly that I was innocent, that I was wrongly accused and exiled. That is all I want. That and more you will have, Corvith said, stepping forward. But there is a larger question that must be addressed. Alpha Grendak is young and was easily manipulated. The pack needs stronger leadership, especially now that we must deal with the consequences of this failed conspiracy. The southern packs will not forgive this easily, and we must prepare for the possibility of war. He turned to look at Zephira directly, and though his face was still hidden behind the council mask, she could hear the respect in his voice. Zephira, daughter of Morni, sister to Driven, you have proven yourself stronger, wiser, and more capable than any wolf in this pack. You have shown loyalty in the face of exile, courage in the face of death, and wisdom in the face of conspiracy. By the old laws and the will of the pack, I propose that you be named Alpha. Let those who agree speak now. The response was immediate and thunderous. Pack members howled their approval, warriors raised their fists in salute, even Grendak nodded his agreement, looking almost relieved to have the burden lifted from his shoulders. The exiles who had fought beside Zephira joined their voices to the chorus, and Breska, standing at the edge of the crowd, smiled her sharp old smile. Zephira stood there, blood still dripping from her wounds, the brand of exile still visible on her shoulder, and felt something shift in her chest. The anger that had sustained her for 9 months, the hatred that had driven her to survive and return, began to transform into something else. Responsibility. Purpose. Not just revenge, but the chance to lead her people, to protect them from threats both external and internal. I accept, she said, her voice strong and clear. I will lead this pack. I will root out any remaining conspirators. I will make us strong enough that no enemy will dare to threaten us again. And I will honor my brother's memory by being the kind of alpha he would have been proud to serve beside. The crowd erupted in cheers, and as the sun rose higher over the gathering grounds, as healers came forward to tend to the wounded and warriors began securing the captured southern wolves, Zephira allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. She had done it. She had survived exile, exposed treachery, and claimed not just vindication but the highest position of power the pack could offer. They had branded her a traitor, cast her out to die alone and forgotten. But she had returned, stronger than they could have imagined, and taken the crown by force and by right. The northern pack would never forget the lesson she had taught them. Some wolves cannot be broken by exile. Some wolves are forged by it into something greater than they ever could have become in comfort and safety. As Breska approached to congratulate her, the old hermit's eyes twinkling with approval, Zephira touched the brand on her shoulder. She would keep it, she decided. Not as a mark of shame, but as a reminder of where she had been, what she had overcome. A reminder that true strength came not from never falling, but from rising every time you were knocked down. The story of the exile who became Alpha would be told for generations, a tale of betrayal and redemption, of justice claimed through blood and courage. And at its center would be Zephira, the wolf who proved that sometimes the greatest leaders are forged not in the comfort of the pack, but in the cold crucible of exile and survival.